Thank you, Acting Speaker. And I rise to contribute on the Labour Hire Legislation Amendment Licensing Bill 2025. And of course, there's been quite a few speakers on this matter and on this bill. And I'll go to a bit of the history first. And obviously, the Victorian Government commissioned the Wilson Review back in July of 2024 with the government's response to that back in December of last year. Accepting all of the recommendations, either in full or in principle. And of course, the review found that most of the relevant interventions sit with the Commonwealth under its broad industrial relations under the Fair Work Act and the regulation of employee association powers, but that there are a number of actions that the Victorian Government agencies can take to enhance oversight and management to deter criminal and unlawful activity. And of course, the measures that our government is adopting aim to complement the Commonwealth reforms, and the placement of the construction division of the CFMEU was put into administration. And of course, we included passing anti-bikie laws in 2024, and that was to make it easier to prevent certain individuals from associating with each other. Of course, the key objective of the bill is to give effect to the government's commitment to implementing the recommendations from the Wilson Review, recommendations 3 to 6, by amending Victoria's labour hire licensing laws. And of course, those amendments will strengthen the fit and proper person test with respect to labour hire licensing, and amending the definition of labour hire provider to align more closely with industry practices and provide greater clarity, streamline the Labour Hire Authority's information gathering powers, and to allow the LHA greater scope to publish information with respect to licensing decisions. Of course, some of the proposals were, as I said earlier, replacing the current fit and proper person test with a new test which enables the LHA to consider a broader range of matters when assessing the suitability of an applicant for a labour hire licence, and that came out of recommendation 3. It also went to amending the definition of provides labour hire services, and to give greater clarity about who is covered by the scheme, noting that the amendments to the regulations proposed in recommendation 4 will be considered following the preparation of the requisite regulatory impact statement, and of course then providing the LHA with a broader notice to produce power to obtain relevant documentations and information. And that's really important. That came out of recommendation 5. It also clarified the scope of existing publication powers and introducing a new power for the LHA to publish information about licensing decisions. And again, that was the recommendation 6, so recommendations through to recommendation 6. It provided greater protection to all LHA staff, as well as the Commissioner in circumstances where they may have been dealing with matters and allegations arising out of the review. It could expand the list of laws that licence holders and applicants must comply with, to include laws relating to education, training, bankruptcy, competition, consumer protection and fair trading, corporate regulation and security interests in personal property. It also amended the Workforce Inspectorate Victoria Act 2020 to prohibit persons from causing or threatening to cause detriment to other persons for making a complaint or providing information to Workforce Inspectorate Victoria as part of their new complaints referral function. And it's already been alluded to by previous speakers about people being intimidated and harassed, I suppose, and threatened in some cases. And no one in any workplace and no employee should be put through that situation and be pressured under that situation. If they have an issue, they have a right to raise their issues. If they're not fairly treated, they have a right to raise that. That's their rights within a workplace, and they needed to be treated appropriately. Of course, the government is committed to supporting all of the recommendations of the review, and as I said earlier, either in principle or in full. Again, that's what this bill is all about. There are many cases, as I've said, about employees being intimidated and harassed and threatened, and there are many situations where it's necessary that when people make a complaint and provide information to the inspectorate, the workforce inspectorate, that they be protected. But in many cases, they're too scared to come forward, and many of them had been threatened, unfortunately. There'd been a lot of consultation about this bill. The Department of Justice, Community Safety, the Victoria Police, the Office of Public Prosecutions, and the LHA and the Workforce Inspectorate were consulted during the development of this bill. Industrial Relations Victoria also undertook targeted consultation with employers and the construction industry peak bodies, and of course the unions, which is really important to make sure that unions were consulted and their members were well aware of what was happening. As I say, there was extensive consultation on these issues. I did have some dealings with labour hire companies through my time as the Secretary of the Ambulance Union and dealing. The ambulance service used labour hire in some cases for back-of-house operations. And it's quite interesting in regard to whether you could obtain the relevant information on wages and conditions for those employees. It also put some of those employees in a very insecure position. They couldn't speak up, or they were scared to speak up about their entitlements, and whether they were being paid the appropriate entitlements is another thing, and whether us as a union could prosecute on that basis. But it was very difficult to deal with and very difficult for those employees to come forward. And as I say, there are many industries, not just the construction industry, but there are many industries, and I know some speakers have spoken about farming and things like that, where labour hire companies are used. And as I say, it's difficult at times to deal with some of the circumstances around employees that are employed by labour hire companies. I'll just make some short, brief comments about recommendation 5. It proposes providing the LHA with the power to request that a person provide information or documents that an inspector has a reasonable belief are necessary for monitoring or enforcing compliance with the Act. And currently this power is broadly linked to an entry power which first must be exercised before making the request for the documents. The recommendation is implemented by the proposed amendments in this bill, and it specifies that the request should give the recipient the option to consent to providing the document or information in the first instance. So that's an important component. And then recommendation 6, as I referred to earlier, proposes that the LHA be provided with expanded publication powers, and it recommends that the LHL Act be amended to empower the LHA to publish additional contextual information about suspensions and cancellations of licences on the register of licensed labour hire providers, and that's obviously to keep people aware of what we would probably say those companies that should not be in practice. This is a really important bill. It comes out of the Wilson Review, and I commend the bill to the House.